Now the Olympus E-M5 Mark III offers a lot of new features like Cinema 4K, 4K video, and also 120 frame per second Full HD. So we'll be going through each of the settings in the video menu and all of the options available, and then I'll try and make some recommendations along the way. Alright, so I've reset the camera back to the defaults and I'm in aperture priority like I normally am. So let's just go into the menu and go into the video menu here. And if we scroll over, the first line item are the mode settings. And this is not too dissimilar from our photography mode where we have program mode, aperture priority, shutter priority, and then full manual. So you would set these to whatever you like working with in video. And then below that we also have something called flicker scan, which is designed to reduce banding, particularly with artificial lighting like LED lights. Sometimes you might get some banding when you're using LED lighting or in your video. This is an attempt to reduce it. It's grayed out now because it doesn't work in every mode, but we'll come back to that later. Then the next line item here are the specification settings where we set the resolution, so we can do 4K or Full HD or HD. And then we can also set the bit rate or the quality of the video, and then also the frame rate, so like 24p, 30p, 60p, etc. So let's click on that. And the first line item here, it looks like we're set at 4K 30p. But if we click over to the right, we can select a different mode. Full HD, fine, 60p, Full HD, normal 60p. We also have a Cinema 4K, and then we have our 120 frame per second Full HD mode. And also as I'm scrolling down, you'll notice here on the bottom left, it's telling me the bit rate of each one of these different modes or specifications. However, on the right, you can see we have a right arrow, which means we can also scroll to the right and then change settings in here as well. So we can change Full HD, we can change this line item to just HD, or we can change it to 4K, or we can change it back to Full HD. The next line item or column here is for the bit rate or quality of the video. So we have super fine, fine, normal, and then we also have all intra. So the super fine, fine, and normal are very similar to our JPEG settings in terms of quality, super fine being the very best, and then fine and normal being a little bit less each. However, there's one more here that you probably haven't seen before, all intra, and that is actually the absolute best this camera can produce. And the idea being not to do any compression between frames. I mean, it's a little bit beyond the scope of what I wanted to talk about today, but I rarely use this because you get very, very large files. Super fine, fine, normal, those are all actually pretty good. And then we also have 60p, or the frames per second. And you've probably heard this a lot too, where a lot of people like to shoot in 24p for that sort of cinematic look. And that's what I normally shoot at, like I'm shooting at 24p right now. All right, but the question is, why do we have 5 line items in the specification settings? Well, this is actually for the super control panel. So let me show you here. Look, we have 4K 30p, right? And then we have Full HD Superfine 60p. So just remember that. Now let's go back into the super control panel. And if we go here, you'll see we have 4K 30p. And I'll just click OK so you can see it. If I rotate to the right, we have Full HD Superfine 60p, fine, normal, Cinema 4K, then high speed 120 FPS. Those are exactly the same as we have in the specification settings. So anything I change here will also be reflected in the super control panel. So a lot of times what I do is I'll just change this to 24p, like so. And I'll leave this alone, and I'll talk about this in a moment. And then we have our high-speed frame rate at 60p. But now I have basically everything set to, oh, I got one more here. Let's change that to 424p. So I have everything set to 24p. And now when I go into my super control panel, you'll see every setting now is in 24p, except for the high-speed frame rate. So let's talk about that for a second. So the high-speed frame rate basically is going to record at 120 frames per second, but this setting 60p is actually what it's going to create the file in. So if you record at 120 frames per second, but then save the file as a 60p, it's basically going to be, and it tells you right here, 0.5 slow motion playback. So it's going to play everything back at half speed, but with a very high resolution in terms of seeing one frame to the next. And you can reduce this down to 50p, 30p, 25p, and then 24p. So this will be 0.2 or 20% as fast. So this is very, very slow. If you take 120 frames per second and spread it out only to 24 frames or 24p. So, you know, if you experiment with that, you'll get a better feel for that. And then in 4K 24p, you'll notice that I cannot change the bit rate because it's fixed at 102 megabits. But I can change the frames to 24p if I want. And then in Cinema 4K, we also have this slow fast. Basically, it's going to speed up the video because it's going to be recording at 24p, but then it's going to save it into a slow motion file depending on what number you put in here. So if I want it to be 4 times slower at Cinema 4K, I would just set it here. And it does this, I think, basically by skipping frames, so the video may get a little choppier the slower you make it if you're using Cinema 4K. So again, it's not a function that I use at all. I haven't found any use for it, but it's something there available for you. All right, and then for noise filter, if I'm shooting at night or vlogging, I'll typically put this to low. But during the day, I like to turn this off if I have good light. It's very similar to the noise filter on JPEG files. The higher you set it, the softer your image is going to get, or the mushier the details. So off or low is the best setting. And then picture mode is a little bit flatter profile to kind of give you a little bit more dynamic range if you intend on processing this in your software later to try and grab a little bit more highlights or shadows with less noise. And you know, again, it's not something I use. I'm pretty happy with just the natural profile that I get, but this is here available for you if you just want to squeeze a little bit more and you intend processing colors and highlights and shadows and everything in post-processing. But I normally have this off. Then the next settings are, again, very similar to our photo modes. This is the autofocus and image stabilization. The default setting, continuous AF, and then we have everything else here. And as always, I always recommend don't use continuous autofocus with tracking. It's not really that good. However, the continuous autofocus with face detect is excellent on this camera. And then we have single point and we have preset. So those are all familiar from our photography. And then the same thing with image stabilization. We have 2 different modes. We have image stabilization with sensor shift and digital combined. So what the camera is going to do is crop in just a little bit to implement this digital stabilization. And you lose about 2 millimeters. So if you're shooting at 12 millimeters, you're going to get about a 14 millimeter field of view. So it just crops in a little bit so it can apply that digital stabilization. And it's really good for getting rid of that wobbly kind of look in wide angle lenses. So I generally always use image stabilization with digital stabilization. However, you can turn it off completely if you're like on a gimbal or on a tripod, or you can do sensor shift stabilization only. And this is perfectly fine for longer lenses where that wobbly effect is less pronounced anyway. But like I said, I almost always use just MIS1. Now the next line item here, button and lever, this again is very similar to what we do in the custom menu that I'll cover later for customizing the buttons and dials. But this is specifically for video, so when you put your camera into video mode, it will change the buttons and dials functions to whatever you set in here, separate from your photography mode. So it's pretty handy. But the default settings are pretty much what you would find in your photography mode anyway. So the ISO button set to ISO, exposure comp is set to exposure comp button over here, and so on. Sometimes what I like to do though is I'll change the record button to be something else. So I might set this to lens info setting because I'll use sort of an adapted lens, which a lot of videographers do. They adapt lenses when they're doing video. And lens info settings is another tutorial that I'll do later, but that's something I commonly do. And then all the rest of these are fine the way they are. And then the next thing is the function lever function. This again is also very familiar or similar to the photo mode, which I'll have to cover in another video. But if you're already familiar with this, good. And then the shutter function, instead of taking a picture, I'm going to change the shutter button here to record mode. Because when you have the camera in video mode, it can't take pictures. It doesn't have that ability. So you might as well assign the shutter button to do something. So in this case, I'm assigning it to be the record button, and then the record button I assign to be what? My lens info settings. So you're gaining an extra button actually when you're in video mode. Now right now, if I push the shutter button, it's going to take a picture even though I changed it there. However, when I turn the mode dial on the camera to video mode, when I push the shutter button now, it'll start recording, as you can see here. And then I can push the record button here and it'll actually bring up lens profiles. If I program any in, I can select it here if I'm adapting some other kind of lens. Alright, so let's stay in video mode and let's go back into the menu. And let's talk about display settings. And this is again very similar to display settings that we have for our photo modes, but this is specifically for video. So in video mode, we can have the live control panel and the live super control panel on at the same time. So we've seen the super control panel by just clicking the OK button, and we can move around to different things. However, if I click the info button, I can go into the live control panel. And this is pretty much the same thing, it's just in a different layout. But this allows me to see the framing a little better, or what's in the scene when I want to make any changes. And to go back, I just click the info button and I can toggle between the super control panel and the live control panel. However, in the live control panel, sometimes you'll see a little info box pop up with the word info here. That means if I hit the info button now, it's not going to toggle back to the super control panel. It's actually going to toggle into let me set some options, like if I want to change the frame rate. So let me click OK. And there's other things in here as well, like keep warm colors on. I can go into the info button and change this to off and click OK. And then if I want to go back to the super control panel, I need to go to a setting that doesn't have an info button option. And then I can click the info button and that'll let me toggle back and forth. But typically I use the live control panel when I'm in video mode rather than super control. So I'm going to turn off live super control. And then info settings, Again, this is similar to our photo mode, but we have a lot of things to choose from that are all related to video. And I like to have all of these turned on except for movie effect. So now that I'm in video mode, everything I have checked off in that box, let me click the info button, that'll toggle the live view. I have my level meters, I have my audio level meters, then I have my regular level meters and all the different settings. But let's say, for example, I don't want to see the histogram because it's kind of blocking too much here. So I can go into the menu, display settings, info settings, custom setting, and then, oh, this is the first one, I can turn the histogram off. And now you can see the histogram is gone. And you can have two different custom settings. So let's set up a second one where mostly everything is off except for, let's say, time code. And let's turn on movie effect and grid. So to toggle between the different custom settings, I just click the info button. So now I have my time code, my level meters, audio level meters, and then I have the movie effect mode down here. But if I don't want to use these movie effects, I can just toggle back to just a full view of the scene, or I can click again and I can get all the information I want to see, like my ISO, my focus, my time code, etc. And then if I want to see the movie modes again or movie effects, I can click the info button. So the info button will just toggle between these different modes. Now let's go back into the menu. And then the next line item here is movie mode, or I'm sorry, movie audio or microphone, and it's on, right? But if I click over to the right, I have it on. I can click over to the right again because, like I said, anytime you see a right arrow here, there's always more options. And this is where we can get into the audio options. And if I click over to the right here on recording volume, I can adjust the recording sensitivity of the built-in microphones on the camera or on the separate microphone if I hook up an external mic through the jack here on the mic jack. And I usually turn this down to about a -7. And it's all going to depend on the mic that you attach to the camera versus the setting that you would use here. And that's something you'll have to experiment with. But typically I do about -7, then I turn the gain up on the external mic as much as I can. And when you have an external mic hooked up, it automatically turns off the camera's internal mics. There's also a volume limiter here which tries to prevent the audio from peaking or going over too high. I always leave this on. It does an okay job. I always keep wind noise reduction off because basically that's similar to like a low cut filter where it tries to cut out frequencies that are similar to the sound of wind. And I never found it very effective, and all it does is really change the way your voice sounds anyway. So I always have that turned off. And then the recording rate, we can actually get a nice high quality 96 kilohertz by 24-bit. And that'll give you the highest quality sound. And then plug-in power is turned on by default, which is good. But most mics that I use are wireless powered mics, so I turn the plug-in power off. But if you're just using a standalone like lavalier that plugs into the camera directly and up to your lapel, or maybe you have a mic attached to the top, some of these microphones don't have their own batteries or own power source, so they can be powered through the microphone jack through the camera. But most of the time I have this off for what I have. But if you're not getting audio, it's possible this might be turned off and you just need to turn it on. And then the last thing here is really something that deserves its own video or topic, but this is for attaching a separate microphone recorder system. Like the Olympus has a voice recorder called, I think it's an LS100, that you can pair with this camera. so that you can get very, very high quality audio. And I imagine this is for like musicians or bands or where audio is critical and you want to record it separately into a very high quality device. You can control it, some of the features through here, like slate tone. If you want the recorder to start and stop along with the camera recording, or if you want it independent of that, slate tones, etc. These are all things that if you're into advanced recording methods with separate recording devices, these things will make sense to you. But again, this is not something that I use or most of us probably use anyway. All right, there's another thing you need to be aware of is right now I'm in video mode, so all of the settings I see and everything I change here will affect the video. So I can go to monotone, I can change the frame rate, I can go to cinema 4K, etc. However, if I'm in a photo mode, like aperture priority, I can still record video by pushing the record button. However, it's always going to record in program mode. It's not going to let you record in aperture priority, shutter priority, or manual, or anything like that. It's going to record in program mode. So just be aware of that. So I'll give you an example. Let me put it in video mode first. And I'm in manual mode. But let's try something in aperture priority. And I'm just going to hit the record button. Oops, I changed the shutter button. Hit the record button. So now I'm recording. And then we'll stop. And then I'm going to push play. And if we look here, you can see the letter A here, auto white balance, natural color profile, and I did full HD 24p, but I did record in aperture priority. But if I go into aperture priority on the camera into photo mode, and I push the record button, I'll just give that a couple of seconds. And then stop. Now let's play that movie. You'll see that even though I was in aperture priority in photo mode and I had aperture priority set in video mode, if I'm in a photo mode, the video is going to record always in program mode, auto white balance. However, you can change other things, well, not necessarily auto white balance, but you can change things like record in monochrome and things like that while you're in photo mode. All you have to do is change this to monochrome. Well, let's try, let's do an art filter, like pop art or, yeah, let's record in grainy film. Let me see if white balance does anything. And then let's hit the record button. So now I'm recording the grainy film art filter. I'm going to hit stop. Push play, and yeah, so we recorded still in program mode, but I am able to change the white balance and the picture mode. One other kind of hidden feature that's available is when we're in movie mode, and let me put the camera into movie mode. Let's go back into the menu and go to the video menu and scroll down to display settings. And under info settings, let's go into custom 2. There's one in here called silent operation that's turned on. What that means is basically is if you're behind the camera and you're recording, so let me go ahead and start recording something. I can slide with my thumb on the touch screen a little side menu, and with this I can touch and I can adjust the volume in small increments or in larger increments, and then go back, or I can change the aperture. So let me go up 5.6 to 7.1 or go down while I'm recording. and then we'll go back to the menu. Or I can dial in exposure comp while I'm recording. So I can make the image a little brighter. And these double arrows up and down are full stops, I believe. And these small single arrows are 1/3 of a stop. And then if up here, I believe that's the power zoom. I can't see it. But if I had a power zoom lens on, like the Pancake 14-42 power zoom lens, I could also zoom in and out while I'm recording by just touching the screen. And those are all of the settings that are available to you in your E-M5 Mark III. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. But as always, I appreciate you watching, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.